The rain came down at a slant across West Madison Street, and Grant Foley didn't hear the truck. He heard his own voice sharp into the phone, and then he heard nothing at all, because 63 pounds of matted grey fur slammed into his thigh and shoved him back onto the curb, and the flat front of a delivery truck blew past his coat with a horn that tore the morning open. Before we go on, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this. For 7 years, Grant Foley had walked past that dog every single morning without seeing him. 7 years of black sedans pulling up at 7:45 to the glass tower on West Madison Street. 7 years of a nod to the doorman, a phone already at his ear, a mind already 3 meetings ahead. The dog had been there for 2 of those years, sitting just past the revolving door, a patient grey shape against the cold brass, watching the crowd with calm amber eyes that never begged and never blinked. And Grant had never, not once, looked down. He had built Foley Capital from a single rented desk in a shared office on Lake Street into a 40-person firm with a floor of its own on the 16th story of the tower at Madison and Wells. He had done it with 16-hour days and a kind of monastic focus that his mother, back when she was still alive, used to call frightening. Sentiment, to him, was a leak in the hull. It got in the way of clean decisions. It made men soft, and soft men lost money and lost respect and lost their families to other harder men. So Grant Foley did not stop for stray dogs, and he did not stop for the small crumbs of humanity that piled up on the sidewalk outside his tower. He stepped over them and kept walking, and every year the tower grew taller in his mind, and every year he grew thinner and quieter and more certain that the way he lived was the only way to live. At 48, he had a 3-bedroom apartment near Lincoln Park that his cleaning service kept in the perfect stillness of a museum. He had a driver, a tailor on Oak Street, a trainer he saw 4 mornings a week, and a table always available at 3 of the 4 best restaurants downtown. He had, on paper, everything a man could be said to have. He had almost nothing that a man could actually hold in his hand. Then came Thursday, October 9th. It had been raining since Monday, one of those long grey Chicago storms that scrubs the color out of everything and turns the lake into a slate that swallows the sky. Grant was on the phone with a man in Zurich about a fund that was bleeding out from the wrong end, and he was walking faster than he should have been, coat open, no umbrella, no eyes on the world. He stepped off the curb at Madison and Wells. He did not look up. He did not check the light. He was 3 words into a sentence about liquidity when something warm and heavy hit him low on the thigh, and the world tilted, and he went backward, hard, into a metal newspaper stand. His phone flew. His hand tore open on a bent corner of the box. The delivery truck blew past him with its horns stretching out into the wet air, close enough that he felt the wind of it against his face. He sat there for a long moment, on the curb, in the rain, in a puddle that was already soaking through the seat of his $3,000 suit. His heart was punching against the wall of his chest, his mouth was dry, his right hand was bleeding, and the dog was already walking away. Grant watched him go. The dog did not look back. He walked slow and stiff-legged across the wet sidewalk to his usual spot beside the revolving door, and he sat down, and he tucked his tail neatly along his leg, and he looked out at the traffic as if nothing at all had happened. Grant's assistant, Nora, appeared beside him with an umbrella. She said his name 3 times before he heard her. He let her help him up. He let her call a car. He could not seem to make his hand stop shaking, and when he tried to pick up his phone from the puddle, the screen was black, and the case was cracked from corner to corner. She took him to the urgent care clinic on Wacker Drive because he refused the emergency room. He did not want the wait. He did not want the questions. He wanted a bandage and a new phone and to get back to his desk before 10. The doctor at the clinic was a woman named Donna Reese, and she was maybe 50 years old, with steady hands and the kind of unhurried voice that people trust without knowing why. She cleaned the cut on his palm and pressed a butterfly bandage into place and told him he would live. And then, tilting her head slightly, she looked at the mud smeared along the elbow of his suit jacket. "That's a paw print," she said. Grant, who was already reaching for his replacement phone, went still. "I'm sorry. On your sleeve." She touched the edge of it with one gloved finger, not quite making contact. "That's a dog. A big one. Did a dog knock you over?" He thought about lying. He did not know why. In the end, because his hand was still shaking, and because his mouth was still dry, and because he had almost died standing there in the rain thinking about a fund in Zurich, he told her the truth. He told her about the truck and the pause in his thigh and the sitting down again as if nothing had happened. And Donna Reese, halfway through peeling off her gloves, stopped and looked at him with a strange and knowing softness that put a chill down the middle of him. "Where was that?" she asked. "The corner. Madison and Wells." She nodded. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she leaned against the counter with her arms folded and said, "There was a young woman brought in here 6 months ago. April. She had fainted on the sidewalk in front of the tower on your block. A witness said a stray had pulled her back from the street by the sleeve, that a bus had come by not 2 seconds later. She had a heart condition she did not know about. If she had fallen forward into that lane instead of back, she would not be walking around today. Grey dog, amber eyes, ribs showing. Sound familiar?" Grant felt something shift in his chest that he had no words for. "Same dog," he said. "By every description," Donna said. "Yes, same dog." He was quiet for a long time in the back of the car on the way home. He did not call Zurich back. He did not check his email. He sat with his bandaged hand on his knee and watched the wipers push the rain in fans across the windshield, and he tried and could not manage to make his mind form a full sentence. That night he did not sleep. He stood at the window of his apartment in Lincoln Park and looked out at the trees moving in the dark. He kept seeing the dog walk away across the wet sidewalk. He kept feeling the pause in his thigh. He kept hearing the horn. He told himself it was instinct. Animals ran into the street. Sometimes they ran into people and knocked them out of the way. And it was not decision, it was not loyalty, it was not love, it was chemistry. Fear firing in the right direction by accident. He told himself this 3 or 4 times, and every time he told himself, he felt less sure of it. By dawn, he had made his decision, though he could not have said what the decision was. He went to the office at 7:15 the next morning, 30 minutes earlier than usual, and stood in the lobby and looked out through the glass. The dog was there. Same spot. Same posture. Watching the traffic on Madison with those calm amber eyes, as if the world were a book he had already read. Grant stood in the lobby of his own building for almost 20 minutes, unable to move. The doorman looked at him with concern. 2 of his junior analysts came in and greeted him and got past him with visible confusion. Grant did not answer them. He stared out through the glass, and the grey-muzzled mutt stared out at Madison Street, and something inside Grant Foley, some carefully sealed door that he had shut long ago and had promised himself would stay shut, began quietly and without ceremony to open. He rode the elevator up to the 16th floor. He walked past the receptionist without a word. He went into his office and shut the door and pulled the blinds on the interior windows and sat down at his desk without taking off his coat. And then, for the first time in 8 years, Grant Foley put his face in his hands. That afternoon, he did something that would have astonished his own board of directors. He cancelled a 2 o'clock meeting with a pension fund from Boston. He cancelled a 3 o'clock strategy call. He told Nora he would be out for the rest of the day, and she looked at him with the widened eyes of somebody who had never, in 6 years of working for him, heard those words come out of his mouth. He rode the elevator back down. He walked out through the revolving door, and this time, When he stepped onto the wet concrete beneath the awning, he stopped. The dog looked up at him. Grant crouched. He was not a man who crouched. His knees creaked in his pressed slacks, and he set his good hand on the pavement to keep his balance, and he looked into the calm amber eyes of the animal that had saved his life. Up close, the dog was worse than he had let himself see. The grey was not just on the muzzle, it was salted through the whole coat, which was matted in places and thin in others, and the ribs Donna Reese had noticed on his elbow were not a passing shadow, but a real cage of bone under a coat that had once been thick. There was a scar across the bridge of the nose that had healed pale, and a slight crust at the corners of the eyes, and a breath that came a little wet, a little rattling, as if some old, patient sickness had settled deep in the chest and was waiting there. "Hey," Grant said. It came out cracked. "Hey!" The dog did not move. He did not wag. He simply looked at Grant without judgment and without expectation, and Grant, whose life had been built on reading the wants of other men across boardroom tables, could not read this animal at all. "Thank you," he said. The dog blinked slowly once, and Grant understood that he had been thanked back. He went inside. He asked the doorman what he knew about the dog. The doorman, a stocky Polish man named Marek, who had worked the tower for 11 years, told him the dog had been sitting there since sometime late in the spring. No, before that, sometime in the second winter, at least a year and a half. Nobody knew where he had come from. He did not bother anyone. He did not beg. Some of the girls from the coffee shop across the street brought him bits of chicken and a bowl of water on hot days. Some nights he was gone. Most mornings he was back. Once, Marek said, an animal control truck had come to take him, and half the block had come out on the sidewalk to argue with the officer until the officer had shrugged and gotten back in his truck and driven away. "Nobody," Grant said, "nobody has ever tried to take him home." Marek smiled, a small, weary smile. "Mr. Foley," he said, "people try. He walks away. Every time. Like he's waiting for something." Grant thought about that for a long time. He went back upstairs. He looked up the number for the Chicago Department of Animal Care and Control. He asked to speak with the officer who worked the downtown corridor. And 40 minutes later, at his desk on the 16th floor, he was on the phone with a man named Ray Sutton, who sounded tired and honest and older than he probably was. Ray Sutton knew the dog. "Grey mutt with the amber eyes," he said. "Sits by your tower? Yeah, I know him. Been trying to catch him for a while now." "You have?" "Not to put him down," Ray said quickly. "Nothing like that. He's not a bite risk. Not a bit of aggression on him. It's the lungs. He's got something, a chronic thing, low-grade infection probably, hasn't cleared through the summer. Winters have been hard on him. If I could get him in for treatment, we could get another few good years out of him. But he won't let anybody near him." "He let me near him," Grant said. There was a pause. "Did he now?" Ray said. By the following afternoon, Ray Sutton was standing on the corner of Madison and Wells in a slicker, and Grant Foley was crouched in his $3,000 suit on the wet pavement, holding a piece of grilled chicken from the deli on the corner, and the dog was walking toward him. Not fast, not eager, just walking, the way a man walks when he has decided that the wait is over. Ray had brought a soft-sided crate and a slip lead and a look on his face that suggested he had already been surprised twice today. He said very little. He watched Grant lift the dog carefully into the crate, watched him fasten the door, watched him carry the crate to the back of his sedan as if it contained something priceless. "He's going to need a couple weeks at the clinic," Ray said. "Antibiotics, fluids, blood work. Somebody's going to have to pick up the bill. You want me to check what the shelter budget can cover or—" "Send it to me," Grant said. "All of it. Whatever it costs." Ray Sutton looked at Grant Foley for a long moment on that wet corner in October, and something in his expression, something that had been reserved and professional and slightly cool, thawed. He nodded once. "All right, Mr. Foley, he said. "I'll take him to the clinic on North Clark. It's a good one. They know what they're doing." "Thank you," Grant said. "Don't thank me," Ray said. "You didn't have to do this. Nobody would have known if you hadn't." Grant watched him drive away with the crate strapped carefully into the back of the truck. He stood on the sidewalk in the rain for a long time before he went back inside. 3 days passed. Grant did not go by the clinic. He told himself he was giving the dog time to settle. He told himself he was busy. He told himself again and again that this was a good deed done and finished. He had written a check. That was the extent of it. That was what men like him did. But on the 4th morning, Nora came into his office and set a slim manila folder on his desk and told him, in a voice that was cautious and a little formal, that she had prepared the background material on the new intern for the 2nd quarter research team. "The interview is at 10, she said. "You asked me to remind you." He had forgotten. He opened the folder. The photograph clipped to the first page was of a young woman with dark curling hair pulled back and a face that had the tired brightness of somebody who had worked hard to be in the room. Her name was Maya Callahan. She was 22 years old. She had graduated the previous spring from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a degree in economics and a minor in statistics, and she was, according to the notes in Nora's careful handwriting, exceptional. Grant read the folder twice. He was hunting for something in it that he could not have named, and when he did not find it, he almost put the interview off, and then, at 10 minutes past 10, he had the receptionist send her in. Maya Callahan walked into his office and sat down across from him and folded her hands in her lap. She was thin in a way that suggested somebody who had grown up watching what was on the table. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were direct. They were, Grant realized with a slow prickle at the back of his neck, the same color as the dog's. That was not the twist. The twist came 6 minutes into the interview. He had asked her a question about a trading strategy, and she had answered it well. And he had asked her a follow-up, and she had answered that one better. He had begun to relax because good interviewing was a kind of dance he could do without thinking. And then, out of nowhere, in the middle of a sentence about her thesis, he had asked her, and later he would not be able to say why, how she had first heard of Foley Capital. She hesitated. "I fell down on the sidewalk in front of your building last April," she said. "A dog pulled me out of the street. I woke up in an ambulance. When I asked what building I had been in front of, they told me, and I looked you up." She lifted her chin just slightly. "I have wanted to work for you since that morning. I promised myself I would earn my way in without ever mentioning it." Grant did not move for a full 5 seconds. "You are the woman," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "The dog," he said. "The one that pulled you back. Gray, amber eyes, the one that sits by the door." Her face changed. She sat forward in her chair. "You know him?" "He saved my life last Thursday." Maya Callahan put both hands over her mouth. For a long second she looked as if she might cry, and then, in that steady, quiet way she had, she pulled herself back together and lowered her hands and said, "Is he all right?" "He's at a clinic," Grant said. "He has been sick for a long time. He's going to be all right." She swallowed. "Thank you," she said. "Whoever paid for that, thank you." He did not tell her then that it had been him. He did not know why. He hired her at the end of the interview. He stood at the window after she left, watching her cross Madison Street below in a coat that was 2 seasons too thin, and he made a decision quietly that she would never know how much of her salary he had adjusted upward in the 20 seconds after she walked out of his office. That was the first crack. The second crack came a week later. The dog came home on a Tuesday. Grant went to the clinic on North Clark to get him himself. The vet, a tall, unsmiling man named Dr. Wexler, walked him through the discharge paperwork with the patience of somebody who knew Grant was not really listening. "He's stable," Wexler said. He's not cured. This kind of chronic bronchopulmonary infection in a dog his age, we can manage it. We can give him a good stretch of comfort. But you should know, going in, that we're not looking at years and years. If we get 18 months out of him, we've done well." Grant nodded. He had been expecting worse. "How old is he?" he asked. "Can you tell?" Wexler looked at the dog, who was lying on the padded mat with his chin on his paws, breathing slow and even. 12, Wexler said, "maybe 13. Not the worst wear on him, no signs of long-term abuse. He was cared for once. Somebody loved this dog. He's got the manners of a dog who used to sleep on a couch." Grant looked down at the dog, and the dog, sensing the look, opened his eyes and lifted his head and swept his tail once, twice against the mat. "Somebody loved him," Grant repeated. "Somebody who died, probably, or lost their home. That's what most of these dogs are. You don't get street dogs like this from indifference. You get them from tragedy." Grant drove home slowly, with the dog in a proper carrier on the passenger seat. And the whole drive back to Lincoln Park, he kept glancing at him and thinking about what the vet had said. Somebody loved him. Somebody who died. He had thought about many things over the past 2 weeks. He had not thought until that moment that the dog had a story of his own, that he had at some point sat on somebody's couch, that he had had a name. "I don't know what to call you," Grant said out loud to the dog, feeling foolish. "I don't know what your name was." The dog looked at him and did not answer, because dogs do not answer. And Grant, driving north through the rain on Lakeshore Drive, found that he was smiling for reasons he could not name. He named him Chance. It came to him without ceremony while he was setting a folded blanket on the floor by the fireplace. He said it out loud to see how it felt in the air of the apartment. "Chance." The dog lifted his head. Grant thought, all right then, and it was done. Chance did not sleep on the blanket by the fireplace. Chance climbed, on the very first night, up onto the foot of Grant Foley's bed, turned 3 careful circles, and lay down with a long, wheezing sigh. And Grant Foley, who had lived alone in that apartment for 8 years, without ever letting so much as a plant break the perfect order of the place, did not have the heart to move him. That was how Chance came to live in the 3-bedroom apartment near Lincoln Park. Grant's life began, in small ways, to bend around the dog. He came home earlier. He learned that Chance did not care much for the elevator, but tolerated it if Grant carried the pill pouch in his hand, the little peanut butter-flavored capsules that they had to give him twice a day for the infection. He learned that Chance liked the walk along the harbor better than the walk through the park, because the wind carried the smell of the water, and the dog would stand for long minutes with his nose lifted into it and his eyes half closed. He learned that Chance had figured out the pantry cabinet in the first 3 days, nosing it open with a slow, methodical patience, and that there was, apparently, no lock in the apartment that a determined dog could not eventually solve. He mentioned the pantry business to Ray Sutton when he ran into him in the lobby of the tower one afternoon in December. Ray asked how the dog was doing, and Grant, without meaning to, told him in some detail about the pantry and about the harbor walks and about the way the dog slept at the foot of the bed and snored softly all night. He said it like a complaint. Ray listened with a small, quiet expression at the corner of his mouth, and when Grant finally trailed off, Ray said, "You know you're smiling, Mr. Foley." Grant felt the smile fall off his face like a sheet of ice off a roof. "I'm not," he said. "Sure," Ray said. "Sure you're not." That was the second crack. The third came on a cold day in January, when Grant was sorting through a box of papers he had brought back from a storage unit he had been paying for since his father's death and had never opened. His father, Robert Foley. Bobby, to everyone, had died 6 years earlier of a heart attack in a single-room occupancy hotel on the west side, 63 years old, alone. He had been a house painter for most of his life. He had been a good father until Grant was about 14, and after that, after the paint shop went under and the mortgage collapsed and Grant's mother left with Grant's younger brother Peter, he had become a different man. A quiet drinker, a retreat into rooms. Not cruel, never cruel, just gone. Grant had lived with him through high school out of loyalty and out of the belief, which had turned out to be wrong, that if he was good enough and worked hard enough, his father might one day come back into himself. Grant had left for college and had not come back. He had built Foley Capital and had never mentioned the paint shop. He had let his father find him twice in his 20s and had bought him dinner both times and had gone home afterward and cried in the bathroom of his own apartment. And then he had stopped answering the calls. He had told himself and believed that he had done what he could. When his father died, Grant had paid for the funeral. He had not attended. His brother Peter had. They had not spoken in 11 years. The storage unit was full of the leftovers of a life Grant had not been ready to look at. He had paid the bill quarterly, automatically, out of a kind of half-buried guilt, and he had never gone. He went now because Chance was sleeping in a warm shape at his feet in the apartment, and because for the first time in a very long time, Grant Foley felt strong enough to look at things. He sat on the floor of the storage unit in a coat too expensive for the concrete beneath him and opened box after box, old paint catalogues, a wedding album, photographs of Peter and Grant on a beach that Grant did not remember, both of them freckled and squinting into the sun, a folded apron, still faintly smelling of turpentine from the paint shop on Ashland. And in the bottom of one box, wrapped carefully in a scrap of towel, a small leather collar, blue, cracked at the fold, a little brass plate riveted to it. On the plate, worn but still readable, one word, Scout. Grant sat there on the concrete for a long moment with the collar in his hands. He had not remembered a dog. He had not remembered a dog at all. And then, slowly, he did. Not from his own childhood, but from the last time he had seen his father at a diner on Belmont, a full 14 years earlier. His father had been thin and quiet and smaller than Grant remembered. He had eaten half a plate of eggs and had asked Grant about work, and Grant had answered in short sentences, and at some point his father had said, half smiling, "I got myself a dog. Little scrappy thing. Somebody left him tied up at the shelter. I couldn't leave him there." He had shown Grant a picture on a flip phone that Grant had barely looked at. A grey puppy on a linoleum floor, a blue collar around his neck. Scout. Grant, sitting on the concrete of the storage unit, felt the world go very slow around him. He was not going to jump to conclusions. He was not going to be the sort of man who told himself sentimental stories about dogs. There was no possible way. His father had died 6 years ago, even if the puppy had survived him, and there was every reason to think it had not, because a man like his father had no arrangements, no next-of-kin plan for a pet. The dog would have gone to a shelter. It would have been adopted, or it would have died. It would not, could not, have found its way 20 miles across the city to sit outside Grant Foley's tower for 2 winters, waiting for him. He drove home. He did not tell anyone about the collar. He put it, still wrapped in its scrap of towel, on the top shelf of his closet. He would not look at it again for a long time, but that night he called his brother. Peter Foley answered on the 4th ring. There was noise behind him, a television, a small child, dishes being stacked. He said, "Hello?" the way somebody says hello to a wrong number, and then when Grant said his name, there was a very long silence. "Grant," Peter said finally. His voice was flat. "I know it's been a while." 11 years? "I know." More silence. "Everything okay?" Peter said at last, in a voice that was cautious and unfriendly. "Yes," Grant said, "everything is fine. I just wanted to ask you something about Dad." Peter said nothing. "Dad had a dog," Grant said. "Toward the end, do you remember? A grey puppy, blue collar. He called it Scout." The silence stretched so long that Grant began to think the line had gone dead. "Yeah," Peter said finally. His voice had changed. "Yeah, he had that dog for about 4 years. Loved it more than anything. Loved it more than he loved either of us, probably." "Why? What happened to it? When he died?" "Why are you asking me this, Grant? Please, just what happened?" Peter breathed out on the other end of the line. Grant could hear him move into another room, close a door. "When Dad died," Peter said, "I went to the SRO to clear out his stuff. There was almost nothing. The manager told me a neighbor had taken the dog. I went and found the neighbor. Guy said the dog wouldn't eat, wouldn't do anything. Just sat at the door waiting for Dad. He kept him for about a week, and then he took him to a shelter. I called the shelter. They said he'd been adopted. That was all I got. That was 6 years ago, Grant. 6 years. I did what I could. I couldn't. I was in Milwaukee then. I couldn't drive down to look for a dog. I had my own kid on the way. I'm not blaming you," Grant said. "Peter, I am not blaming you." Peter was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Are you asking about the dog?" Grant sat in the dark of his own living room in Lincoln Park, with Chance breathing softly on the rug at his feet, and he could not, in the end, say it. He could not tell his brother, on a phone call after 11 years of silence, that he thought his father's dog might have been sitting outside his tower waiting for him for 2 years. He could not say that. He could not say any of it. He was not ready to be the sort of man who said those things out loud, not yet. "I found his collar," he said. "The dog's in Dad's storage. I was going through things. It stopped me." "Ah," Peter said. There was a long pause. "Grant," Peter said. "Yes, you should come over. Meet Ellie. She's 5. She's a person now." His voice was very careful. "I'm not saying that to guilt you. I'm saying that because I mean it." "I will," Grant said. And because he was trying, and because Chance was on the rug at his feet, and because something in him had begun slowly to give, he added, "Peter, I am sorry." "I know," Peter said softly. "I know, Grant. Me too." They hung up. Grant sat in the dark for a long time. When he finally moved, it was to reach down and put his hand on the coarse grey fur of Chance's head. The dog lifted his chin into the palm without opening his eyes. "I don't know if it's you," Grant said quietly. "I don't know if it's you, Scout." Chance's tail thumped once against the rug, and Grant told himself it was coincidence and did not believe himself. The business subplot began in February. Foley Capital had, for as long as it had existed, been run by 2 men. Grant Foley on the public side, the face at the pension board meetings, the signature on the letters to investors, the voice in the room when the room needed a voice. And, in the shadow of him, Reed Halston, Chief Financial Officer, Grant's college roommate, best man at Grant's brief and unhappy marriage 20 years earlier, the man who had helped him build the firm from one rented desk. Reed was a quiet, careful man with a full head of prematurely white hair and a soft way of talking that put everyone at ease. He handled the books. He handled compliance. He handled, more or less, everything Grant did not want to think about. And he did it so well that Grant, over 16 years, had come to trust him the way a man trusts his own hand. In early February, one of the junior analysts on the research team, a boy fresh out of Wharton, whose name Grant kept forgetting, came into Grant's office with a printout and a nervous expression and said he wanted to run something by Grant that he wasn't sure about. The printout showed a series of transfers from one of the smaller pooled accounts to a numbered brokerage account in Delaware. The transfers were small, 20,000 here, 40,000 there, but they added up over 18 months to almost $1.7 million. The Delaware account was not a client, it was not a vendor, it was not, as far as the analyst could tell, anything at all. Grant looked at the printout for a long minute. Then he looked at the analyst. "Who else has seen this?" "Nobody. I was going to bring it to Mr. Halston, but I don't know. Something told me to bring it to you first." Grant nodded slowly. "Good instinct," he said. "Leave the printout with me. Don't mention it to anyone. Not one word. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." The analyst left. Grant sat at his desk with the printout in front of him and felt the floor tilt under his chair. He was, at first, sure there was a mistake. He was sure that Reed Halston, whom he had known for 28 years, could not possibly have done this thing that the numbers so unambiguously said had been done. He was sure there was some explanation, some client relationship he had forgotten, some fee structure he had never been briefed on, some clerical accident that would resolve itself in a phone call. He asked, without telling Reed, for a full audit trail on the account. It took the analyst 4 days to pull it together. When it landed on Grant's desk the following Monday, Grant read it twice and put his face in his hands. Every transfer had been signed off by Reed Halston. Everyone. He did not confront Reed, not yet. He did something instead that he had never done. He called a lawyer he trusted from outside the firm, a woman named Priscilla Vance, who had once done contract work for him and whom he had liked because she asked good questions and did not fill the silence. He told her everything. She listened. She said at the end, "Grant, you need a forensic accountant, not somebody at the firm, somebody outside. And you need to keep going to work every morning as if nothing is wrong until we have the whole picture. Because if he is doing what it looks like he is doing, and he sees you flinch, he will vanish, and the money will vanish, and you will be the one holding the bag." "All right," Grant said. And Grant, "Yes. Trust nobody at the firm with this. Not one person. Not your assistant. Not your compliance officer. Not your right hand. Nobody." "Understood." He hung up. He looked out the window of his office at Madison Street, 16 floors below, at the corner where he had almost died in October. And he thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that he had lived his whole life surrounded by people he had chosen to trust the way a man chooses furniture, and that he had never, until chance had shoved him back onto the curb, really looked at any of them. He went home that night and lay awake with the dog snoring at his feet, and he made a list on the ceiling above him of everyone in his life. It was a short list. It was much shorter than he had realized. Chance, Maya Callahan, the intern, who was doing extraordinary work in her second month. Peter, whom he had begun, tentatively, to call on Sundays. Nora, his assistant, whose loyalty he had earned, but not, he now understood, ever properly returned. Ray Sutton, whom he had come to think of, oddly, as a friend. Dr. Donna Reese, at the clinic on Wacker, who had sent him a note a week after the accident to ask how the dog was doing. That was the list. Reed Halston was not on the list. He should have been at the very top of it. He was not. And Grant Foley, staring at the ceiling in the dark, understood at last that some part of him had known for a long time and had chosen over and over not to know. The forensic accountant came in on a Saturday when the office was empty. Her name was Louise Yee, and she was a small, meticulous woman who spread her materials across the conference room table with the unhurried efficiency of somebody who had done this many times. Grant sat with her for 11 hours, drinking coffee and eating sandwiches, and by the end of that Saturday they had a picture. The Delaware account was Reed's. It had been opened 5 years earlier under a shell entity called Halcyon Bridge Holdings. The $1.7 million was not the whole story. Louise Yee, following the paper trail out from Halcyon Bridge, found a second shell and a third, and a small residential real estate portfolio in Wisconsin, and, most damning of all, a series of forged signatures on transfer authorizations that had been shipped over 18 months from a laptop registered to Reed Halston's home address in Winnetka. "How much total?" Grant said. Louise Yee, without expression, said, "Between $4 and $5 million. Grant sat back in his chair. "That is going to gut us," he said quietly. "If it becomes public before we can control it, that is going to gut the firm. That's true, Louise Yee said. It is also true that you are legally obligated to report this to the SEC within a specific window. If you don't, and it later comes out that you knew, you will be personally liable. There is no path here where you get to be quiet. I know, Grant said. I know. He drove home slowly. He stopped on impulse at the corner of Madison and Wells, and he stood there for a minute in the cold and looked at the empty spot beside the revolving door where a grey-muzzled mutt had once sat waiting. Chance was at home in the apartment. Chance had been at home now for almost 4 months. The apartment did not feel like Grant Foley's apartment anymore. It felt like their apartment. And Grant, thinking about that as he stood in the cold on Madison Street, understood suddenly that he had a great deal more to lose now than he had had in October. He went home. He fed Chance. He sat on the floor of the living room with the dog's head in his lap, and he told him out loud in a quiet, steady voice what was coming. Chance listened with the courteous patience of an animal who does not need to understand words to understand a man. And when Grant was done, the dog put his head down on his paws and let out a long, slow sigh, and Grant took that as counsel. He decided to confront Reed on a Tuesday morning. He asked him to come into his office at 9. He shut the door. He sat down. He asked Nora quietly to hold his calls, and Nora, reading his face, did not ask why. Reed Halston walked in with 2 coffees, one in each hand. He set one on Grant's desk. He sat down across from him with the easy familiarity of somebody who had been walking into that office for 16 years. "You look serious," Reed said, smiling. Grant slid the file across the desk. Reed did not open it. He looked at the folder. He looked at Grant. And Grant, watching, saw the smallest flicker of something pass across his oldest friend's face, a shadow, gone in a second, and knew that whatever hope he had held on to for the past 2 weeks, the hope that there might still be some innocent explanation, was over. "Grant," Reed said quietly. "Open it." Reed opened the folder. He read 3 pages. He closed it. He set his coffee down. He looked at Grant with a face that had gone very old very fast. "How long have you known?" Reed said. 2 weeks. "Who did the trace?" "Nobody at the firm, outside forensic." "Ah." Reed nodded slowly. He looked out the window. "Is Priscilla involved?" "Yes." "Then you have already decided?" "I have already decided." They sat in silence for a long moment. Reed did not seem oddly surprised. He seemed almost tired. Almost, Grant thought with a jolt, relieved. "Grant," Reed said finally, "don't. You don't want to know why?" "I don't need to know why. What you did was theft. There is no why that fixes what you did." Reed nodded slowly. He looked down at his own hands. "My son," he said quietly, "was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's 3 years ago. He's 28 years old. There is a treatment. It's experimental. It is not covered by any insurance in this country. It costs, the ballpark is $500,000 a year, and I couldn't ask you for it. I couldn't, because you and I both know what you would have said." Grant said nothing. "I would have said yes," Grant said at last, in a voice he did not recognize. "You didn't know that, Reed. You didn't know that." Reed looked up at him. "Grant," he said quietly, "you have not been a man who says yes to things like that. Not for a very long time. I have watched you for 16 years. I love you, I do, and I know exactly who you have become. You were not going to say yes." Grant felt as if he had been slapped. He wanted in that instant to argue. He wanted to defend himself, to list the moments in his life when he had been generous, to insist that he was not the man Reed was describing. But the truth, the terrible, level truth of it, was that Reed Halston, who had known Grant Foley better than anyone else in the world, was right. The old Grant Foley, 6 months ago, would not have said yes. "I would say yes now," Grant said quietly. "I would say yes now, Reed." Reed smiled a small, sad smile. "I know," he said. "I can see that. I have watched you since October. I have watched the dog change you. I have watched and I have thought, my God, if only he had gotten here a year sooner. A year sooner and I would not be sitting on this side of your desk." Grant looked at him. "You knew," Grant said. "You knew about the dog. Everybody at the firm knows about the dog. Grant, you are a different man. Ask anyone. Ask Nora." Grant sat back. "I am reporting this to the SEC," he said. "I have to. Priscilla will handle it. There is no world in which I don't. But I will testify to your motive. I will testify to everything. I will do what I can for you. Do you understand?" Reed nodded. "I understand. And I will pay for your son's treatment, personally, starting now. Whatever it takes. Whatever the treatment costs, for as long as it costs it. That is not connected to what you did. That is a separate thing. I want you to understand that." Reed Halston put his face in his hands and cried, silently, for almost a full minute. Grant did not move. He sat across the desk and watched his oldest friend's shoulders shake, and he thought about the dog on the corner and the collar in the closet and how many things a man could learn in 4 months that he had refused to learn in 40 years. When Reed lifted his head, he wiped his face with the flat of his hand. "You are going to lose the firm," he said. "You know that." "Not the firm," Grant said. "The reputation maybe, some of the clients, not the firm. The board will move against you. They will blame you for missing this. They will—" "Let them," Grant said. "Let them try." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Grant Foley's professional life. Priscilla Vance handled the filing. Louise Yee handled the documentation. Grant himself sat, day after day, in a conference room with lawyers from 3 regulatory bodies and answered every question with the same tired, honest patience. Reed Halston resigned. Reed Halston surrendered his brokerage license. Reed Halston, in a private meeting Grant did not attend, agreed to a settlement that would give back every dollar he had taken and would take him, financially, back to the level of a first-year associate. The criminal side of it would be worked out later in a courtroom over months. Grant slept badly. He came home to Chance every night, and he sat on the rug with him and he talked to him, sometimes for hours, about everything that had happened that day. Chance listened. Chance leaned into him. Chance did not judge. The firm shook. 2 of the biggest clients pulled their money in a single week. The board did, as Reed had predicted, move against Grant. There was a vote. It was closer than Grant would have liked, but he won it. And in the aftermath of the vote, sitting in his office in the empty tower at 10 o'clock at night, with Chance asleep on the leather couch by the window, Grant Foley understood, for the first time in his life, that he had almost lost everything he had built and that he was, somehow, more or less all right. He would rebuild. It would take a year, maybe 2. He was going to be all right, but Chance was not. It happened on a Tuesday in March. Grant came home from the office at 7 in the evening. Chance did not come to the door. Chance was not when he checked the bedroom at the foot of the bed. Chance was in the little laundry room off the kitchen, lying on his side on the tile, breathing in a way that Grant had never heard before, shallow, rapid, wet, with a small, rattling catch at the end of every breath. Grant knelt beside him. The dog's eyes were open. They tracked Grant's face and steadied there, calm as always. "Hey," Grant said. His voice was already breaking. "Hey, Chance. Hey, buddy. Okay." He carried the dog to the car. He drove to the emergency veterinary hospital on Belmont at speeds that would have gotten him arrested 6 months ago. He carried the dog through the sliding doors. He said out loud to a young woman in scrubs who came around the counter to help him, "Please, please, please." They took Chance from him. Grant sat in the waiting room. He did not read a magazine. He did not check his phone. He sat on a hard plastic chair with his hands folded between his knees, and he thought about nothing at all, because thinking about anything was more than he could bear. Dr. Wexler came out. It had been almost 2 hours. "Grant," Wexler said. He sat down in the chair beside him. He did not deliver bad news standing up. Grant would remember that later. It's the infection. It has moved into the lower lobes. He is a very sick dog. Is he going to? He is stable. Right now. We have him on oxygen and IV antibiotics, and we are watching him. But I am not going to lie to you, Grant. He is 13 years old. He has been fighting this for years. His body is tired. Grant nodded. He could not speak. I would like to keep him here overnight, Wexler said. Maybe 2 nights. Then we take stock. There is a chance we get him back on his feet for a while longer. There is also a chance that we do not. I want you to be ready for both. Grant nodded again. He heard himself say, "Can I see him?" "Yes. Come with me." They took him to a back room. Chance was lying on a padded mat under a small, clear tent of oxygen. There was an IV line taped to his front leg. His eyes were closed. His breathing had already smoothed a little. Grant knelt on the linoleum floor beside him. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, buddy, it's me." The grey muzzle twitched. The amber eyes opened, unfocused for a second, then found him. "I'm right here," Grant said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here." He stayed there on the floor for an hour. When the tech came in to change the IV, she did not ask him to leave. When another tech came in, sometime later, she brought him a folding chair without a word and put it beside the mat, and he moved from the floor to the chair, and Chance's tail gave one slow, tired sweep against the mat, and Grant put his hand through the flap of the oxygen tent and rested it on the dog's shoulder and left it there. He did not go home. He did not go to work in the morning. He called Nora at 6 a.m. from a landline at the reception desk of the emergency animal hospital and told her to cancel everything for the week. He sat by the mat. He talked to Chance quietly. He read to him out of a magazine he found on the waiting room table, in a voice that started to hurt after a few hours, but that he did not stop. Maya Callahan came by on the second day. He did not know how she had found out. Later he would understand that Nora had told her. She sat with him for 2 hours. She brought him coffee. She did not try to make him talk, and she did not, when he did talk, look surprised at any of the small confessions that came out of him in that low, fluorescent-lit room. Ray Sutton came by on the 3rd day. He brought a bag of soft treats that Chance loved, and he sat with the dog for a long time and stroked his ears with the certain, gentle hands of a man who had done this for animals more times than any human being should have to. Peter drove down from Milwaukee on the 4th day and sat with Grant for 2 hours and did not say much of anything. And when he left, he squeezed Grant's shoulder in a way that was more of an embrace than a squeeze, and Grant, in the fluorescent light of the veterinary waiting room, understood that his brother had come back to him for good. Dr. Donna Reese came in on the evening of the 5th day. She had somehow tracked him down. She brought him a paper bag with a sandwich in it and a cup of soup, and she sat with him for an hour in silence, and before she left she said softly, "You have loved this dog well, Grant." "He saved my life," Grant said. "Yes," she said. "And you saved his." She left. On the morning of the 7th day, Chance ate a full breakfast for the first time. On the 8th day, he stood up. On the 9th day, Dr. Wexler said, in the same flat, careful voice, "Grant, I don't know how you are going to feel about this, but he is coming back. He is not out of the woods yet, but he is coming back." Grant went out to his car in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel and put his forehead on the steering wheel and, for the 2nd time that year, allowed himself to cry. Chance came home on the 14th day. He climbed, that same night, up onto the foot of Grant Foley's bed, turned 3 careful circles, lay down with a long sigh, and slept. That spring, Grant Foley's life took a shape he had not planned and could not have predicted 6 months earlier. The regulatory investigation dragged on. It cost the firm 9 of its top 40 clients. It cost Grant personally an estimated 40% of his net worth. most of which he used to make the affected funds whole out of his own pocket rather than argue over insurance. He gave a long, unflinching interview to a financial magazine in which he took public responsibility for missing what Reed Halston had done and did not once, in the entire 12,000 words of it, blame anyone but himself. The magazine ran the piece on the cover. 2 industry publications wrote follow-ups. Half of Grant's peers stopped inviting him to dinner. The other half, quietly over the next months, began sending him referrals. Maya Callahan, in that same period, was quietly promoted to full analyst. She was extraordinary. Grant found himself in the mornings walking past her desk on the research floor and stopping to talk, briefly, about a paper she was working on, and finding himself lifted by it in a way he did not expect. In April, on the anniversary of the accident that had brought her onto his sidewalk, he asked her to have coffee with him. She said yes, and over that coffee, in the shop across from the tower on Madison Street, he told her everything he had never told her, about how he had paid for the dog, about how he had known she was the woman, about how the dog was his father's dog, or he believed it was. Maya listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "May I tell you something?" she said. "Please." "My mother worked for a paint shop on Ashland Avenue when I was small. The owner went out of business when I was 7. I remember that. I remember my mother crying because she had lost her job. Do you know the name of the paint shop?" Grant felt the room narrow. "Foley and Sons," he said quietly. "Foley and Sons," Maya said. "My mother worked for your father, Grant. He was kind to her. He kept her on for 6 months after he stopped paying himself. She told me. She has always told me. His name in our house, Bobby Foley, was the name of the good man who tried to keep his people paid until the very end." Grant put his face in his hands. "My God," he said. "I did not know it was you," Maya said gently. "I did not know until this coffee. I thought your father's name was a common name. I thought I had been lucky in a stranger's tower. I did not know until you just said it." Grant sat there with his face in his hands, and Maya Callahan, 22 years old, reached across the small round table in the coffee shop on Madison Street and put her hand on his sleeve. And Grant, who had lived his life terrified of the softness that made men weak, felt something quiet and permanent settle inside him. That was not the last thing. That was only the second to last thing. The last thing came in May. Peter had brought his daughter Ellie down for a weekend. She was 5. She was small and bright and full of an unfiltered curiosity that Grant, who had never had children of his own, found astonishing. She loved Chance. She lay on the rug with him for an hour with her arms around his neck and told him, in a low, serious whisper, everything she knew about horses. Chance permitted it with the patient grace of an animal who had, over a long life, understood what small humans required. At some point on Sunday afternoon, Peter set a folder on Grant's kitchen table. "I brought you something," Peter said. "I wasn't sure whether to. I've been thinking about it since you called in January. I found this a few months after Dad died, and I never told you because we weren't talking. I found it in the box the funeral home gave me. It was in his wallet." Grant opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph, faded around the edges, taken, from the look of it, with an inexpensive camera. A middle-aged man. Grant recognized his father with a small punch of grief, sat on a park bench with a grey puppy on his lap. The puppy had a blue collar. His father was smiling at the camera. On the back of the photograph, in his father's slanted handwriting, 3 lines. "Scout, first day home. He is going to be a very good dog. If anything happens to me, please find my son Grant. He's on Madison and Wells. He works in the tall glass one." Grant read the words 3 times. He did not speak for a long time. "He wrote that when the dog was a puppy," Peter said quietly. 9 years ago, 9 years, Grant. He never stopped. He wanted the dog to find you if he couldn't. Grant looked out into the living room. Chance was lying by the window, head on his paws, watching Ellie play with a scattering of paper cups on the rug. The late afternoon sun caught the grey in his muzzle and turned it silver. "Peter," Grant said quietly. It's him, it's Scout." "I know," Peter said. "I have known since I saw him at your door yesterday. I have known since he walked over to me and put his chin on my shoe. I didn't know how to say it. I still don't know how to say it. I know that dog, Grant. He used to sleep on my feet when I stayed at Dad's before the divorce. I would have known him with my eyes closed." Grant Foley sat at the kitchen table with the photograph in his hands and cried quietly, while his brother put a hand on his shoulder and his niece played on the rug, and the grey-muzzled dog, who had been carrying a 9-year-old promise across the streets of Chicago, slept in the light by the window. That night, after Peter and Ellie had gone to bed in the guest room, Grant sat on the floor of the living room with Chance's head in his lap and told the dog, quietly, everything he had never had the chance to say to his father. He told him about the paint shop and the diner on Belmont, and the 2 dinners in his 20s, and the funeral he had not attended. He told him about the shame that had lived in him for a decade and a half, and about the mother he still missed, and about the brother he had let himself lose, and about the young girl on the sofa in the guest room he now knew, without any question, that he loved. He talked for almost an hour. Chance listened, and every so often the tale gave a small, slow sweep against the rug, and Grant took it that night as the only forgiveness his father was ever going to be able to send him. The story could have ended there. It did not. In June, Grant Foley did something he had never done in his adult life. He took a full month off. He did not go to the office. He did not check his email. He did not answer his phone unless the caller was Peter or Maya or Ray or Priscilla or the veterinary hospital. He rented a small house on a lake in southern Michigan, and he took Chance, and he took a stack of books he had been meaning to read for 15 years, and he sat on a porch, and he read them. Peter came out for a week with Ellie. Maya drove up for a weekend and brought her mother, whose name was Dolores, and Grant met the woman his father had tried to protect 30 years earlier, and they cooked dinner together, and Dolores told Grant every story she remembered about his father, and Grant listened, and he wrote them down in a small leather notebook he kept beside the bed. His father, in the stories, was a man Grant did not fully remember, a laughing man, a stubborn man, a man who once refused a paying job because the client had insulted the woman working the counter. It was as if Grant had been handed the missing half of a life he had thought he already knew. He came back to Chicago in July, a different man. He rebuilt Foley Capital slowly. He hired differently. He promoted Maya to senior analyst before the end of that year and to a partnership within 3 years, the youngest partner the firm had ever had. He set up a scholarship in his father's name at the trade school on the west side, where his father had once taught a night class in commercial paint techniques. He set up a foundation quietly that funded veterinary care for stray dogs in the downtown corridor of Chicago. And he asked Ray Sutton to run it, and Ray Sutton, after some grumbling, because he was that kind of man, said yes. The old Grant Foley, the one who had walked past Chance for 2 winters without looking down, would not have recognized any of it. Reed Holston went to prison. He served 18 months. Grant visited him twice. Reed's son received the experimental treatment, and 2 years later was walking without a cane. When Reed was released, Grant did not offer him his old job. There was, they both knew, no coming back from what had been done, but he did offer, and Reed did accept, a place on the board of the foundation, and the 2 men, over the years, learned again how to speak. Chance lived, against every prediction Dr. Wexler had made, for another 2.5 years. He died in his sleep at the foot of Grant Foley's bed at the age of 15 years and 4 months, on a warm night in October, 3 days short of the 3rd anniversary of the wet Thursday, when he had shoved a stranger back onto a curb on Madison Street. Grant did not go to work for a week. Maya covered his meetings. Peter drove down from Milwaukee. Ellie, who was 7 then and knew the dog well, drew a picture that Grant, more than a decade later, would still keep on the shelf beside his bed. They buried him in the yard of a small house Grant had bought a year earlier in Evanston, a house with a yard, because the dog had loved the harbor and had earned, at the end of a long life, a piece of grass of his own to lie in. Grant marked the grave with a small flat stone. On the stone he had 2 words carved: Scout. Home. There is a moment, and Grant would tell it over the years, to people he trusted, and only to people he trusted, because it was the sort of story that could sound sentimental in the wrong ear. It happened on the morning after Chance's death. Grant had not slept. He had sat up with the dog's body in the bedroom for a long time, and then, when the sky began to grey, he had wrapped him in the blanket Chance had always slept on, and he had carried him down to the car, and he had driven, without knowing exactly why, to the corner of Madison and Wells. It was 5 o'clock. The city was empty. There was nobody on the sidewalk. Grant parked the car and got out and stood on the corner where a grey dog had once sat waiting for him for 2 winters. The wind came up off the lake. It was cold for October. Grant stood there for a long time. He did not weep. He was past that for the moment. He simply stood, and he watched the sky lighten over the river, and he thought about his father. He thought about his father, sitting on a park bench 9 years earlier, with a small grey puppy in his lap, writing on the back of a photograph in his slanted handwriting, "If anything happens to me, please find my son." He thought about a dog, choosing a sidewalk out of all the sidewalks in a city. He thought about the day it had rained, and the horn and the pause in his thigh, and the calm, amber eyes watching from the sidewalk. And Grant Foley, at 56 years old, standing on the corner of Madison and Wells in the cold dawn, said quietly, to nobody, "Thank you, Dad." The wind lifted. A newspaper page skittered along the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a garbage truck began its morning route. Grant got back in his car and he drove Chance home to be buried in the yard in Evanston, and he began, at last, to live the rest of his life. 12 years later, when a young financial reporter from a national magazine came to interview Grant Foley for a profile they were writing on him, a profile that would run under the headline, "The Firm That Saved Itself," she asked him, near the end of a long afternoon in his office, what he considered the turning point of his career. She was expecting he could tell a story about the fraud. Everyone always did. It was the natural answer. Everyone wanted to hear about the Reed-Halston affair, the vote of the board, the year of rebuilding, the way he had walked back from the edge. Grant Foley sat with his hands folded on his desk. He looked at her for a long moment. "A dog," he said. The reporter waited. "A grey dog," Grant said, "with amber eyes. He sat outside this building for 2 winters, and I walked past him every day, and I never once looked down. And then one wet Thursday in October, he pushed me back from a delivery truck that would have killed me, and I went home that night and I could not sleep, and I have never, since that morning, been the same person." The reporter, who was young and quick and had done her homework, said, "The dog you buried in Evanston, Chance." "Scout," Grant said. "His real name was Scout. He belonged to my father. He walked 20 miles across a city to find me. He waited for 2 winters. I did not know it, and he could not tell me, but he did." He turned in his chair and lifted a photograph off the shelf behind him. Not the picture of himself with the puppy, and not the picture of his father with Scout. A third picture, one the reporter had not noticed until then. Chance, in the last summer of his life, lying on a wooden dock at the edge of a lake in southern Michigan, with Grant Foley sitting beside him with a book open in his lap and a foolish, unguarded smile on his face. The reporter looked at the photograph for a long moment. "That is the picture I would like to run," she said quietly. Grant looked at her. "Not the office one?" "Not the office one. That one." Grant nodded. "All right," he said. "That one, then." He gave her the photograph. It ran on the cover. And that is how the story of Grant Foley and the grey dog, who had waited for 2 winters on the corner of Madison and Wells, became, in a small and quiet way, a thing that people passed to one another, and copied and posted and remembered. It became the sort of story that people told on long evenings when they had had too little sleep and needed to believe, again, that a life could bend. There is a corner in Chicago, on West Madison Street, with a small brass plaque set into the sidewalk. Someone was waiting. That is all it says. Most people walk past it without ever looking down. They are in a hurry. They have somewhere to be. They have a phone to their ear, but every so often one of them stops. Every so often one of them kneels down. Every so often one of them reads the plaque and looks up and looks around and understands in some small and permanent way that they have been surrounded all their life by things they have never bothered to see. And that is the whole story. That is the whole thing. If it moved you, if it made you think of somebody you have walked past 100 times without looking down, do something small today. Say hello to the person on the corner. Feed a stray. Call the brother you have not called in a decade. Do the small thing. It matters more than you know. And if you have made it this far, thank you for staying with the story. Leave a comment. Let me know where in the world you are listening from. And if you would like to hear more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and stay with me for the next one. I will see you there.